Hello, everybody. This is Sean Bagby. I'm a PTA caucus delegate, and as part of an ongoing conversation we're trying to have with people, we are bringing you a conversation today to talk about not just finding your job in physical therapy, but finding the right fit and a career path for you. And with that, I want to introduce the people we're going to have on the panel today. First one is Scotty.
Hi there, I'm Scotty Gamboa. I'm a recent grad PTA living in Oregon. I graduated at the end of August and am working right now part-time at Integrated Rehabilitation in Portland. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Anytime. And next is Cameron.
Hi there, I'm Cameron Masumi. I'm the CEO of Virtual Physio. It's a telehealth clinic that practices out of Maryland and Virginia. I graduated last year from PT school and started my career in outpatient orthopedics surgery.
All right. And then finally, we're going to have Ben Fung on. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Ben. I'm a physical therapist out of San Diego, California. I transitioned out of clinical care after year 3-4-ish, post new grad, and co-founded UpDoc Media, now known as UpDoc Inc. And we do our very best to try to create a little bit of wage transfer and wage literacy to the job market in physical therapy.
Awesome. So we will be going with everyone talking on this. So if you guys have questions, please put it in the comments and we'll do our best to get them. But we want to make this as interactive. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them. So let's start. Scotty, since you're the newest grad, tell us what it's been like trying to find a job during the pandemic and what your process has been.
Yeah, so originally I was supposed to graduate in June, and so kind of started the job search around then. But pandemic happened and my clinicals got pushed back, so I ended up not graduating until the end of August. But during that whole time, I was definitely kind of keeping my eyes open, seeing what's available, kind of starting to put applications out. In our area in Oregon, there aren't a lot of outpatient jobs available right now. It's mainly home health and skilled nursing facilities. And because of my family situation, I knew skilled nursing was kind of off the table for me. But, outpatient was always my passion. I'm really into manual therapy, kind of pelvic health type stuff, people with pain. And so I knew that's the area I wanted to go into. And kind of my mantra growing up, there's kind of 3 things you look for when you're looking for a new job. And you base it based off of location, you base it based off of your passion or money. And for many PTAs, this is our second career. And so I feel like, location is usually set for us. We are limited based off of family and kids or, spouses and where they live. So my husband lives here in Portland with me, obviously, and he had a job. So we were kind of set and staying in the Portland area. So for me, I kind of had to decide, is money more important or is, finding something that I'm passionate about more important? And luckily for me, I was able to finally find a place. It's only part-time, but it's at a really great clinic that I'm excited about. They're really into mentoring student or new grads. It's a setting that I'm passionate about. So I feel like I'm really fortunate that I landed in a good spot.
All right. And Cam, you're a year out and you've already started your own company. Can you talk us through kind of your journey from graduation to where you are now?
Sure. So I graduated from PT school August 2019, and I spent a little bit of time working part-time from the place that I had my last clinical while trying to find the right fit. After several different interviews, a couple offers, I found a clinic that I thought met all the things I was looking for. And I worked there for about 6 months, and then we were kind of in the full swing of the pandemic. And unfortunately, I was furloughed and then laid off. So I had a lot of thinking to do and figure out, what did I want to do? Did I want to pursue finding another job? Or did I want to go ahead and start my own clinic? I had always planned on doing that. It's just my timetable was a little bit longer. I had planned on about 2.5 years out doing that. And, I said, why the heck not? And just decided to jump in, spend a couple months planning, and I launched my business about a month ago.
Awesome. How is are you starting to settle into the business? Are you starting to grow the practice? How's it treating you so far?
It's good. I mean, every day is a learning experience. My business is primarily telehealth. I do about 80% online, 20% in person. So my hybrid model is new. I love the telehealth aspect. I think it's really great. It's a good way to improve accessibility for patients. And it also lets me be more creative and interact with my patients in their home environment or work environment. So, I can really dial in and tailor what I'm doing to what they have access to and to the specific pain problems that they have going on. Outside of the clinical aspect, starting a business comes with a lot of different learning processes. So I've had to really be on a crash course for online marketing and things like that. It's been eye-opening. It's been humbling, but it's been a really cool experience so far.
Great. So that's two different approaches for people that are kind of newer out of the school world and into the profession. But Ben, will you give a little background on like what you guys do at UpDoc as far as like your what you guys have as far as information and what you see the trends have been right now for PTs and PTAs nationally?
Totally. I guess a little bit of background. As a physical therapist early on in the new grad journey, I found it kind of personally frustrating with some of the, I guess, both the career-oriented glass ceilings, but also some of the pay-oriented glass ceilings that exist. And I didn't discover that until I broached into corporate management. And then all of a sudden, my eyes were open. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff out there that we all kind of need to know certainly grad. And so I kind of went on this personal mission of trying to discover things. And in the meanwhile, became a co-founder of what we found at the time known as APTA, now transitioned to UpDoc Incorporated. And so daily really is in the world of media marketing and business development. And part of the media aspect is public industry, open source data collection and reporting. And so one of the things that UpDoc does is it releases a job market pulse report, which is an open source data pool on job market information for PTs, for PTAs, honestly, for all rehab therapy. And it's sorted now by state, even specific as zip code, definitely the setting, specialty, and the years of experience. And we've done this for quite some time now, for 5+ years. And something that we've really noticed in the last even 18 months or so is twofold. Number one, we're seeing a condensation in terms of a PT assistant pay, where things are becoming much more consistent for PT assistants. Whereas we're seeing the opposite for physical therapists, where the confidence interval of what you might get paid as a new grad is really, really wide ranging. We used to be something like 15 to 18% in terms of standard deviation. Now we're dealing 22%. So, depending on where you are as a PT, it could be really, really wide variations as a new grad and into your career, whereas it's a little bit more stable even since pandemic for PT assistants. Now, there's also some CMS changes that I'm sure we're all, at least a little bit aware of, and that's seemingly changing things a little bit. A lot of organizations don't really know what to do with it on the front lines quite yet, and I'm sure we'll see trickle-down effects that we're hoping to report on come New Year. But ultimately, one thing I can say about it is that people are very much leaving organizations in a hurry, as much as they're unfortunately being furloughed or eventually laid off, based on how they, as a workforce, interprets the for lack of better terms, the social responsibility that particular organization or employer is acting on. Are they really a good employer? Are they doing the best for the interest of the consumer, for the interest of the patient, for the interest of their workforce? And the culture of the organization is mattering a whole bunch. And just like Scotty said, you tend to work for a place for what you do, where you are, how much you get paid. We're seeing that people are saying yes initially, to get people into those jobs, but then they'll stay because the organizational culture is truly an excellent and favorable one.
Right. And I think that plays a huge role into it. And so kind of, Scotty, as you were looking at a job, looking for a job, how were you kind of judging places where you wanted to work? How'd you look at their culture?
Yeah, so that's definitely a big part of it for me. As a PTA in our market, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of outpatient jobs available. And so I think, I would like to say it was a huge factor for me to find a good a good place that I felt comfortable being in, and felt like they had, they were taking the pandemic seriously, and they had a lot of social responsibility. And I just happened to be lucky that I found a place that ticked all those boxes. Like I said, I was really fortunate in that I felt like I could wait to find a good fit for myself. I wasn't in a rush to find a job. And, the place that I'm currently at, sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought a little bit here. They, it was one of those things where when I first applied to the job, I was kind of like, honestly, the salary wasn't where I thought it was going to be. So I kind of took it as let's do a practice interview, right? Like, let's kind of go in there. We'll see how it works. I've never interviewed for a PTA job before. We'll try it out. And then after talking and interviewing with the PT there, I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually a really great fit. This is a person that really wants to mentor their staff. This is a place that they want to keep employees on for a long time. They're really flexible with, work-life balance stuff. They are really passionate about making sure they're keeping their patients and their staff safe with COVID. And so during the interview process, it kind of went from this might not be a great fit to oh my goodness, this is perfect for me.
Awesome. So Cameron, what was your experience with coming out of school and dealing with that?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of pressure up front, from looking at my peers and then from my family for just taking the first job. And I had to give a lot of pushback. For me, it was really about, doing my due diligence and the research and looking at, what was normative pay, what are the things I was looking for in my first job. Because for me, it was more about a career, not a job. I wanted more mentorship personally, because I already knew that I was going to be starting my own business eventually. So it wasn't that I was looking to necessarily move up within one company, but I really wanted to make sure that I was laying a foundation that I could move forward later. It's funny. I mean, someone turned me on to Ben's company about data, and it was great. I mean, I use that as just one of my resources, but there's there's plenty of stuff that the government puts out, like salary.com, things like that. And I like to look at a bunch of different sources to really pool the data there. And then, for me, this, much like a lot of PTAs, myself as a PT, this was a second career for me. So I already had quite a lot of experience applying for jobs. I was on the hiring side in the past, so I knew what to ask and what to look for. But looking for that fit was really more so about did what the company was doing and their ethics and their morals, did they resonate with me? And I was fortunate that I found a group of individuals that seemed like-minded with me, shared a lot of the same interests, and were very passionate about the profession, very engaged within APTA, and that was important to me because that's something that I like to stay involved with too. So I just made sure I didn't settle, and I took the time I took a few months to make sure that it was the right fit.
Great. And I'm actually interested, Cam, to hear how your perspective as being on the hiring side really changed your lens when you were on the employee side in a new field. How was that?
It was totally changed everything. You learn a lot of nuances in what are some kind of shady things that employers get away with. And it was just, it was funny to me because, I'm not going to name any names here, but there's some employers that,
about to get real.
Yeah. Right. There's some employers that unfortunately prey on students that just don't know how things work.
We have data on that.
What was that?
So we have data on that.
Oh, I know. I'm sure you do. And these are well-known things, and it's sad, but to me, it's making sure that you can ask about, what is the return on a patient visit, things like that. Like what are the billable units that are there? What are these other average things? Your value as a PT, be like, okay, well, if I'm generating this much income or revenue for you, then I should be getting paid this amount of money. It makes no sense for me to get paid this little. So being able to walk into an interview with that sort of information just makes you in a much more of a powerful position in that negotiation. And I think that helped me separate the places where I definitely didn't want to be from the ones where I was like, okay, this is worth both my time and their time for sitting down and talking.
Cameron, I think that's a really interesting point, because I also came from a background where I had done a whole bunch of hiring. And I think people are really timid when they come into interviews, especially right now where they feel like they're in a place of weakness, where they're like, I am desperate for you to hire me. Please hire me. I'll do whatever it takes. But really, like, you still need to ask those important questions, because like just having a job is one thing. But what if you only have it for 6 months? Because all of a sudden you realize like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And then you're basically just starting back out at ground zero. So like asking those questions aren't red flags for employers. They're like, oh my gosh, this person's actually interested in being here term.
They really want it.
Yeah.
I think that this is the perfect time for this particular panel too, because one of the things that has been in the back of my mind for a couple months now is just sheer fear for new grads, because I feel more than ever there's this sense of urgency. Oh my gosh, I need to have a job. I need to have income. Like, how am I going to support, myself, potentially my family, like all these different things, because, we don't know what's happening with this pandemic. It's getting worse again. What are we going to do? And I'm like, okay, take a breath. Nothing's worse than putting yourself in a position where you're going to be miserable and hate doing what you're doing. You don't want to get burned out in your career when it's just starting.
Yeah, when you were talking there, it took me back to something that comes in my head a lot with the pandemic, right? Physical therapy was born out of a pandemic. That's where we started. Mm-hmm. This is our opportunity to redefine it. Now, that redefinition is going to be led by groups of people like us, by the people willing to have these discussions and understand our value. And you guys brought up a very good point, is value. So, they don't teach that in school, of defining your value, right? So, Ben, this is more towards you. How do we help set people on the road to understanding their value?
I think understanding your own value really it starts with a mindset, almost an emotional anchor before it gets into the objective. Because I feel like everybody can find statistics, and then you find this interesting, and we talked about it pre-broadcast, this imposter syndrome thing, right? Like, you can find a way to rationalize the rational against yourself and be like, well, but that's not me. Like, I totally suck, right? Or like, I have no power here. Like, you can find a way to convince yourself, and that's not true, and Cam mentioned it, every clinician, PT, PTA, we bring in a certain amount of direct billable revenue to any practice, any organization, period. Sometimes it's indirect, like if you're a contracted SNF department, or if you're part of acute care, it's an indirect revenue, but it's still there, and whether they account for you as a loss, like some nonprofit hospitals will account for all the staff minus the physicians, the surgical staff, the imaging staff, and the mid-level practitioners as everybody else's support staff as a cost to that particular facility or hospital. But still, there's value there that wouldn't be generated, and you wouldn't have patients unless you existed. So understand that it's not necessarily that you have value because you exist. You have value because you exist as part of a care experience. That's number one. And don't think of it as, oh, it's my label. I'm just a PT, or I'm just a PT assistant, or I'm just a that. You're not just a that. You are that. And that's an integral part of the patient care experience, no matter what specialty setting or location you're at. And I think understanding that really sets the mind up for success. And when you do get into that mindset, then you can start to take a look at data at a far more objective value point and go, okay, wow, like, if I'm working an outpatient and the average, if the average course of care is 12.5 visits and typically at 3.7 to 3.9 units per visit, then I'm actually generating, if you multiply those units by, say, $25 or $35 per unit, that's what I'm generating. And so if I'm being paid a certain hourly equivalent, that needs to be equitable for the area. Now, that's a discussion you need to have with whatever hiring manager you're having the discussion with, but that's also a red flag, right? It's the whole interview thing. You need to be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And as scary as it might be, I can't tell you how bad it is to work for a bad organization or maybe a bad part of an organization and lose your entire flame for why you joined this profession to begin with. And it happens way more often than I think people are willing to make mention of, because there's a certain sense of failure and shame there. But it wasn't necessarily that you failed. I feel it was that the organization, the employing organization, failed you. And so now that we're talking about value, there's a couple of references that I can send you to, like BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, great place to get like an overarching sense of how much people are supposed to be paid for their profession. There's a lot of aggregate websites like salary.com, Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor. Those are great. They aggregate data from sometimes each other, which you can kind of tell because everybody's saying the exact same thing. So it doesn't necessarily help, but it gives you an idea so that, if somebody comes in there and you go have an interview and they offer you minimum wage, you can kind of tell them, no, thank you, or you can just go flat right back at them. There must be a joke, $1 million, right? You can come at that with more understanding. Obviously, I have to plug our company's job market pulse data pool, but also look at our payer info pool, because then you can see what people are actually getting paid and you can attribute that to your contribution as a clinician. And one more thing that I would also recommend that whoever's watching this, whether right now live or on replay, in terms of understanding your value, is that understand that there's a lot of loss for organizations when they don't have a fully plugged in supply chain, when there are treatments being missed, when there are evals being missed, when a clinic isn't at full capacity. There's a lot of revenue loss right there. And so there is a stopgap for you being hired at the right place at the right time that's very valuable to an organization, whether it's a standalone practice or a hospital-based practice, or maybe it's a contract, whatever the case might be. There's a lot of value there for you being right then and right there. That's why a lot of travel and temporary assignments pay kind of top dollar just to plug that hole until you might transition that into a full-time or part-time gig. Understanding these things from the business side really allows you to see this thing objectively versus coming in timidly, say like, oh, I'm just a new grad. I hope you don't, yell at me right now. It's like, if they're going to yell at you right now, you don't want to work with them. There's a saying in human resources, what they will do for you, they will do to you, and I think Scotty and Cam both mentioned, right? Like if there's some sketchy stuff happening on that, like hiring interview business end, that's a great place to just get a little bit of practice and just peace out and be like, okay, I learned. Not them.
I think something that Ben talked about there was really important, and it kind of got sandwiched in between all that value he was just given. But it was honestly the fact that the interview is two directions. And I think a lot of times that gets just missed. And it's sad because that's the most powerful part. You should be the one that's in that driver's seat just as much as they are. And I can tell you from experience as a hiring manager, like one of the best things for me whenever I would have a prospective employee come in is I wanted to see how much they try to take control of that conversation. And I didn't want the interview to go where I asked all the questions and then we get to the end and I'm like, do you have any questions for me? Because if I get to there and you didn't ask me anything, then for me, it's just like, you're not showing the initiative, or you're not showing the tenacity to really take initiative in the job. So as a physical therapist or physical therapy assistant, you're the one that's driving the rehab of your patient. So you should be also taking control of because you're the one that handles that patient care. So when you're in that interview, you want to make sure, okay, well, what is the culture like here? What sort of cooperative nature is there, or is it, I'm just kind of in my own lane? Ask all those sorts of questions or whatever it is that's pertinent to you, and that's just going to help you figure out whether that company or that job is a good fit. Because again, literally, it's not so much do you fit with them, it's do they fit for you.
And I'll add on to that, Cam. Don't get locked into the typical questions. Like we've talked a little bit about cultural fit, right? Do your research. Know what that company's mission and vision is. And if the hiring manager can't tell you their mission and vision, or they stumble on it, or, are they really living it, or is it words on a paper? Like we have the ability to be an autonomous giver of care in the healthcare system. We can do so much more, but we've got to have that ability to take that power back. And it starts by redefining that approach and that system. And I think that's of an utmost value to what it is, and really trying to find those areas where we can do that.
Actually, just so it doesn't skip my mind, Sean, you mentioned it, right? Like, our profession was born in pandemic. And I think one area that, if you're watching this, you're like, how can I present more value? If you even have this much cardiopulmonary rehab experience or background, or are willing to dig that much further in, that's something that's of huge value right now, is the post-COVID or post-acute COVID long haulers rehab. That's something that we should be really, truly leading on that edge. And while cardiopulmonary PT isn't necessarily like the most glamorous thing historically, there is a huge chance for it now, because there's a lot more technology and methodology available to us. There's a lot of evidence about what does and doesn't work that's become available in the last 5 to 10 years. Like these kind of thought processes of not how do we make what we're currently doing better, but what have we kind of laid on the wayside just because of happenstance and time in history that we might want to reclaim and take the leading edge on, mostly because society needs it.
Yeah, and that'll bring me back to another point, and I feel like I'm talking too much here, so anyone else jump in here. But Ben has kind of hit on it twice now for me. Like, we've given up portions of our practice over time, right? We've done those things. One of the biggest things we need to do that has an impact on our value is the advocacy fight. We have to continue to fight and demonstrate our value and worth. And an insurance company is not my determination of my worth. The value I bring to the patient I see is really it. And there is a financial equation that goes along with it. And we shy away in our profession from valuing what we do, right? But a lawyer has an hourly rate. A plumber has an hourly rate. We don't need to be ashamed of our hourly rate. We need to advocate for the equitable and proper payment for what we do. And that helps build up the revenue pot that then gets distributed back out to clinicians.
Amen.
Well, talking about value again a little bit, I want to touch on something that Ben mentioned was, a lot of new grads don't feel like they have value. And, at least in my area, there's kind of this mantra of like, okay, you're a new grad, you're going to go to one of these, 4 clinics that are kind of hire new grads, and they kind of chew you up and spit you out in 6 months or a year. But they're the ones that mentor you, and no one else wants to touch that. So what value do you have as a new grad to go to these new clinics and be like, hey, it is worth it to mentor me for a year or more? Why hire a new grad that doesn't have this experience yet?
Well, from my point of view, like, a new grad offers you the opportunity to help mold and shape them, to develop them. I mean, if you're looking at companies that care about clinicians, and that's what we all want, right? We want you to be the best version of yourself, not just because that makes you a better employee, but because that's going to better our profession down the road. And so, like, every opportunity is a chance. Every job is an opportunity to learn something and grow something. And I've grown from every job I've ever had, right? But I've also been lucky to find great mentors along the road who, if I was in a bad time, were able to say, hey, you need to be looking at X, Y, and Z. And really, they were right. And so mentorship is so important. And if you can't get it in a company, either it's not the right company for you, or you've got to find the person that can mentor you and help bring you to where you need to be. There's a place for all of us. We're not in a scarcity model. We've got to get away from that mentality.
To build on what you were saying there, I was going to say that mentorship is a very misunderstood topic. I think a lot of times people are just like, I want it. I know I'm supposed to have it, but I don't know what it is. But true mentorship. Yeah, exactly. Like, true mentorship is a two-way street. And a mentor is going to learn just as much from a mentee and vice versa. If you think about it, like, students that come out of school are educated with the most current research.
There it is.
literally. So in some aspects, you know a little bit more than the established clinicians out there. Of course, it's not going to trump experience. So you still need that. And it's very valuable. It's nice to have somebody that you can rely on to get information or mull over a tough case. But what I think is fascinating is that literally, if you went around and you like polled students, you said, what is it that you're looking for in a job? They're like, mentorship. Okay, what does that mean to you? And you're never going to get a straight answer. And it's always going to be, well, like I just, I don't feel confident in my skills. Okay, I understand that. I was there too. But the first thing that I tell students is go out in the clinic and you'll be surprised at how much you know, because number one, imposter syndrome is real. Okay. Like you're going to think you don't know it, but you do. And your patients are going to know that you know it and they're going to trust you. And that feels really good. It's amazing feeling when you start helping a patient and you don't have that crutch of a CI. Like I don't know how to describe that feeling, but it's great. And you know that you're able to really make sure that you're becoming the best version of yourself. And you're always going to evolve over time. But I think that mentorship just tends to be a little bit more of a muddled term than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. I want to expand on that, and I'm going to share a couple of things that some people are not going to be happy that I'm going to share, which is probably why I'm here.
That's why I got you, Ben.
First off, I mean, I want to echo that so much because it's a bell curve, and it's a people thing, right? It's not experience, it's not your degree, like that stuff needs to go away, right? For every amazing 30-year veteran clinician, there's also going to be this rock star day one new grad that's hanging at the same level, and vice versa, right? And you have to also remember, it's not your years of experience that pays, it's your license. Now, you might have value added because you've been in a community for, say, 15, 20 years, and everyone in that tri-state area knows you and therefore goes to that practice. So you have a lot more value in terms of branding is being contributed to that particular location or practice. But from a revenue generation standpoint, your license is your license. You get paid what you get paid, whether you're 1 day out or 30 years out. To consider too is so many surveys that we run at UpDoc. There's a series called the Practice Management Survey. We're actually doing an end of year 2021, which has gotten really interesting. A lot of narrative stuff to say there. But actually, the first survey responded said their number one pain this year is finding quality people. And in past years, that's continued to ring true. And so many of them, and this is private practice primarily. And so we're talking like sub 20 locations. They want new grads. They prefer new grads. They want new grads because you are moldable. You have all the latest stuff. You have energy. You're not bitter or cynical about the profession. You're not going to come in and go like, well, we didn't do it that way, right? Like you might questions about billing practices because you haven't seen that particular variation, but you still have that direct fireline passion for what you do, and I think there's so much value there, and I feel like value and mentorship, those words are definitely, you can get really, really muddied on that. I agree. But in terms of like direct value on that negotiations or interview table, like compared to say, what does a day one new grad have up against somebody who may be like 10, 15 years of experience? You have all the latest stuff. You're fresh and you're eager to learn. And you need to be able to impress that upon your hiring manager on that interview. Because I can guarantee you somebody that's 10, because I'm 10 years out plus, if I were to interview all over again, I probably wouldn't have that. It's not part of my fabric as much as I hope it would be compared to a day one new guy, because I don't live there anymore. So there's so much that you can offer. And it's up to the hiring manager to kind of look at my candidates and go, okay, you know what? Right now, what's best for my team, I actually want that new grad who's eager and willing to learn, because maybe they can bring in that attitude that can become of the part of the pieces of my departmental culture. And that might actually help my third year out, my fifth year out, my 8 year out, and the 25 year out that I'm managing as a 5 year out manager. That much more hunger to learn new things, to try new things, to be new things that our patients need and that our profession needs. So there's just so much there that I hope, if you gain nothing from this broadcast or replay, that don't count yourself out. And can do so much more than you think you can. If somebody tells you otherwise, probably not the best people for you to be working with or for.
So let's say you live in an area that only has those companies that train you for a year and then you got to go work somewhere else. What do you recommend for those students that are just like, what do I do with myself?
Do what Cam's doing. Start your own business.
Man, you beat me to the line.
I mean, I'm actually very surprised that more new grads don't run your own companies, because I don't know what you were told, but what I was told and what my mentors were told always was, oh, before you start your practice, make sure you practice for 5 years, because then people will trust you. Does anybody walk through the door, right, on eval day go, wait, have you been in practice for 5? No, can't work with you, right? Like, nobody checks that. Like, nobody checks your GPA. There's a personal connection that's part of the patient engagement spectrum that you need to be good at, and it's not necessarily experience based. And I say that, if you were trained and there's a lot less rocket science to it, you feel confident enough in your product as a clinician, there's nothing wrong with starting your own practice. Yes, it's a calculated risk, but so is life. I think pandemic has really taught us certainty isn't so certain, right? Like, working for these, bigger companies that are supposed to have very stable jobs isn't so stable. You have to make your own path and your own future. And I think part of that is, being covered in the talk today. You got to carve out for yourself.
I think that what Ben just said was probably like the greatest softball lob he could have ever given me, because that is exactly what happened when I started in the private practice before I started my own clinic. Because I got in there and I was so nervous that patients were going to come, because I was working with 2 clinic owners, and they had like 20 years of experience, and it was me. And I was so nervous that they're going to be like, oh, I don't want to work with the new grad. But it was funny, like, everyone told me, like I talked to some of my classmates, and they said, yeah, you should introduce yourself as hi, like, I'm a new grad. I was like, why would I do that? It makes no sense. So I didn't. And it was funny because, my patients trusted me, and they loved working with me. And then there was a new receptionist that started, and she started referring to me as a new grad on the phone. And I caught her one day doing that. And I was wondering why the past couple of evals I'd had were like real standoffish with me. And so I said something to the receptionist. I said, hey, if you don't mind, would you not say that? I'm not trying to hide it, but I'm also not trying to, like, there's no reason to share that information. And the funny thing is, the people that she had said that to, I followed up with them when I did my progress note. And I said, if you hadn't heard that, what would you have thought? And they're like, oh, I would have thought you've been doing this for like 10 years. And I just think that is so powerful, because you're taking away a predetermined perception and letting someone formulate their own opinion. And in my experience, 100% of the time, they trust you. And like, because you're building that true and honest rapport, and you're taking some arbitrary number that doesn't actually mean anything. Because just like Ben said, there's that bell curve. And if you trust yourself and you believe in, like, what you can do, your patients will believe in you too. And I just think that that's really powerful.
The one thing I would add on that, Cam, is like, the one thing that we have to do in the profession, we have to do if we're 5 years out, 30 years out, 6 months out, is mastery, right? Like, there's so much that we can learn about the patient interaction and growing that skill set to make sure that we are the premier provider of musculoskeletal care. And it's our opportunity and duty, but like, there's no reason you can't be working on mastery while growing your own brand, which is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of growing your mastery, like, if there are, new grads out there, and I know there's even, in my cohort, there's probably half of us that have jobs right now. If you can't find a job in the area that is a good fit for you, how do you guys recommend that we keep our skills fresh and we, still are good candidates for people, even if it's 6 months down the line?
For me, I would tell you to find the ways to be active. So whether that is finding a per diem, finding a part-time, practicing your skill and not letting someone dictate, like, that's the way we do it here. Like, find those places where you can grow who you are as a clinician, and then, find those ways to continue to master your skill by growing by growing it in terms of like continuing ed, in terms of research, talking, mentorship. All these things will help grow you, and they help give you that in, right? Like the beautiful secret about APTA is like we're an organization made up of individuals, right? There's so many people that I can talk to, that I look and see like them in research, them in things like this, and I'm like, good Lord, how am I having a conversation with this genius? But it's the connections we make within the association that opens up the door. It's what gives someone that opportunity to like, hey, there's a job opening with us. Why don't you come apply? Things like that. And so like that's how I tell new grads right now to like don't get frustrated by it. You've got to either enlarge your geographical reach, or you've got to find the ways to like make yourself better while you can.
I want to dovetail off of that because I feel like you kind of touched on something that's been a pet peeve for me professionally. Is I feel internally we see ourselves as like pieces of the pie. Like I'm an ortho, I'm a neuro, I'm a peds, that kind of stuff. Where really, clinically, the consummate clinician really does see that as part of a continuum. And I feel like that's the same thing in terms of what we talked about earlier, is advocacy, right? Like advocacy is one of those pieces of the pie, which really should be seen as part of the whole pie. Like not just like, okay, like this is somebody else's job and I'm going to work on ortho over here, and I don't like neuro because they want me to do movement before I do manual. Like who cares? Like what we really should care about is the big picture of it. And speaking of that big picture, is there's so many solutions outside of our immediate lens that really lends well to our profession. Like I've learned so much from hospitality over the last 5 years, and apply that to how I help practices promote themselves to new patient discoveries. And that's something you can do, while if you don't have a job right now, is look outside of the industry. 1, 2, you can look at who you perceive to be industry influencers and leaders, whether it's research, exercise, manual, what have you, is to brush up on those things by looking at their content and seeing what stuff that you could glean from that and add that to your own. And I think that is so super powerful because too often, that saying, I forget which book it comes from, but it's you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And like so often, like if you're in that daily work, that's all you're gonna do, right? If everybody in your clinic does pulleys and manual and Pilates driven stuff, then that's all you're going to do. You're gonna forget about strength and conditioning. You're gonna forget about other types of mat activities. You're probably gonna be so focused on that because everybody's doing that, and just by the proxy of your environment. So if you look outside of that, it's gonna really help you stay sharp. And I agree, get a per diem if you can, even if it's like once a month, like take it. For a while, as I was transitioning into the full-time startup life, I was transitioning away from home health. And so I would get myself dispatched on weekends, like random places, in my county. But that helped me stay sharp. And many times showed me, like I had to prove it to myself, that whole imposter syndrome thing again, because I have an acute care background, but I had to prove it to myself, like, hey man, my differential diagnosis is still pretty on point. I was able to detect a lot of bad stuff because it always happens on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and like, okay, you're going to the emergency room because you're going to throw a clot, like that kind of stuff would happen routinely. And I think that we need to take that essence, especially if you're struggling right now. I know it's really tough financially. It's really tough, like emotionally and just like your mental moral spirit. But if you just dig in, it takes you not too long, whether it's on social channels, on YouTube, Google searches, what have you, and you can dig into some of these content producers and go, hey, you know what? That's some pretty cool stuff. And I should just follow it and just kind of get my eyes on it and immerse myself so I can change one of these 5 personas that I'm surrounded by. Because if it's, you yourself and Irene, that could be bad, right? So you bring that out to something else. And just to harp on the experience bit a little more is, you have to remember, you already got some reps in school. All right. Like there are some fantastic affiliations out there. And I think it's an insult to our educators and to our researchers and to our CIs to say that, oh, well, that all washes away day one new grad because, that doesn't count anymore and you're just a cute new grad. That stuff matters a whole bunch. It's not just about the years of experience, about the quality of it. It's not just about the time on the mat. It's about, hey, what was the content of your your time on the mat? Were you actually practicing and sparring against a resisting opponent, or were you just batting out forms like ballet? Nothing against ballet, but doesn't really have much in terms of martial arts metaphor, right? So I feel like I'm rambling here, so I'll stop and just say that there are always going to be channels for you to enrich yourself. Many times it's going to come outside of your immediate scope, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, to touch on that a little bit then. Oh, go ahead, Cameron, you're good.
No, you got it.
Well, I was just going to say, one thing that was really apparent to me when I graduated was like, oh my goodness, there are 24 of us. We all just graduated. We're all applying for the exact same jobs. Like, what is differentiating me from all of these other people? And, the one thing you mentioned was about like making sure your CIs and all of that knowledge you gain doesn't just go away when you start looking for jobs. And I even put on my resume, like, CI comments from the CPI.
Nice.
And targeted it towards what jobs I was applying for. Like, I was applying for a job that was all about manual therapy. So I went to my CPI and looked at all of the manual therapy comments and picked them and said, oh my goodness, showing great manual therapy skills, can progress or whatever the comments might be, to kind of differentiate yourself a little bit. And then Sean, kind of what you mentioned too, is getting involved in, and I know this is kind of the cliche, get involved in the APTA, but it's not just about like being a member. Like, you need to put into it what you want to get out from it. And, just saying like, oh, I'm a member of the Oregon chapter. It's like, okay, so what does that mean? Go attend the membership meetings, go attend the advocacy meetings, go join some sort of committee and start to get to know people.
Go to a PT pub night. When those exist again, and you never know where connections matter. Go ahead,
virtual pub night.
I was just gonna say, so Ben's pet peeve is something I share too, and it's a lot of that silo mentality, and I've never understood it. There was a really good book I read, I think it was about a year ago. It's called Range, and it's interesting because it talks about the difference between someone who is eclectic or has a lot of experience in different areas, or someone who is a hyper specialist. And it just shows that you do a disservice in whatever your industry is. So apply this to physical therapy. If you're like, I am only a neuro PT, all I see is the neuro patient. Well, no, you don't, because your patient is not a neuro patient. They're a person. They happen to have a neuro diagnosis or something going on, but they still benefit from other knowledge that you have in your brain. Okay, you're not isolating one pathology or one type of treatment. So I think that in the PT world, we kind of tend to have a little bit of an identity crisis, which is why I think APTA has done a pretty good job with our shift to more of this movement system, because I think it makes sense, because you're looking at a holistic view of a person, or a person-centric model, and then a actionable treatment plan, right? Because like we all are experts in movement. And all these systems kind of tie in together. So from a student standpoint, when they're transitioning into a clinical role, you definitely need to rely on the education that you have. And I think one thing that gets overlooked is the fact that a novice clinician is a less efficient clinician inherently, because you just don't have the volume or experience. But on the flip side, you're more of a revenue generator than someone who is more efficient. So one thing that you should think about when you are looking at applying for jobs is the fact that you probably actually generate more revenue for a clinic than someone who's been there for a long time. And I just thought I would plug that in.
So, in something that I haven't been able to get in with Ben and Cameron kind of going there was, we tend to put ourselves in this box of, we treat in a clinic, right? People move in multiple ways throughout life, and there's so many inherently different ways that physical therapy can serve our society, that we've got to break these molds that we get into. And Cam, you're an example of it with really the telehealth portion of your clinic and building it like that. And like, that is what I personally would love to see our profession grow, is get away from the walls and really get out into communities and serve members of the communities that need us, because they're out there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I pushed for when I wanted to start my clinic. Is I said, I don't. First of all, I don't want to be tied into a clinic, but accessibility is like a big thing for me. So I wanted to meet my patients where they are. So the easiest way that I found to do that was to do this telehealth model, and then I also have concierge options, so I can go to you, kind of a thing. But in light of COVID and everything, I've been focused primarily on that telehealth model. But I agree with you. I think that the breaking down the barriers of okay, you only work within this confines of this clinic, needs to be something that we should move away from.
All right. Well, guys, we're approaching an hour, so I guess we'll start with Scotty. Scotty, you got any final comments or anything else you'd like to discuss?
The last thing I would just like to say is, don't be afraid to negotiate your salary. I know, Ben, you kind of touched on this a little bit. One thing I did for my job was just trying to figure out, like, okay, so this is the salary you're willing to pay me. I think, my value is this. Explain to, whoever you're interviewing with why you think your value is higher, and don't be afraid to get a little creative. I mean, part of the thing we talked about was like, okay, so what do you offer for continuing education? Can you bump that up if the salary is not negotiable? Or, I was in a fortunate position where I don't need healthcare. So I was like, if I deny your healthcare benefits, what can you give me in exchange? And that definitely helped bump up the salary a little bit.
And that's a good point. And really, all throughout your career, the benefit package and what you need will vary and change. And so not being afraid to have those conversations becomes very important. Great point, Scotty. Cam?
Yeah, we keep harping on value a lot. And I think that one thing that the new grad should think about is that you are, I think Ben was talking about this, you're not just a PT, you're not just a PTA. And don't overlook your other skill sets, because they have inherent value in themselves. So one thing that I would suggest is think about what you do or have done in the past or currently do on the side, outside of your professional life. Do you have experience in social media? Do you have experience in web design, graphic design, marketing, any of those sorts of things? There's a pretty good book by Cal Newport. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. I'd suggest checking that out. It just gives you a way to kind of reframe your thinking around, what can you offer, bring to the table? Because you can package those skills and bring them to whatever clinic or company you're working for and say, look, I can do other things than, patient care itself. And a lot of times I think people don't think about that, but it can significantly increase your value to a clinic.
100% agree. 100% agree with you there, sir. All right, Ben.
Cam, to speak to your point, one of the things that for whatever reason I was always asked about in every job interview was my history as a bartender. It was like the thing. Nobody wanted to talk about anything else. Like, you were a bartender? What goes into this? Like, I don't know. That was 8 years ago, but it's like, vodka, but it was just a thing. And that's the thing, is that your entire history as a person is part of that value proposition. So I wanted to at least close my own thoughts here on this broadcast with three things. First is statistic, what that statistic brings you in terms of your value proposition, and then using that value proposition to guide that right job, right time, right purpose, reason, based on the 6 dimensions of compensation for you to think about. So the first statistic is when you do ask for anything, whether it's a raise or if it's negotiation your starting salary, we've noticed in our data sets that it's anywhere between 4 to 12%. So you can confidently ask in that range almost off the cuff, regardless if it's a brand new job or if you've been there for 2 or 3 years. You can ask that very safely. Nobody's gonna be offended, and if they are, probably not the right place. And mostly because that your direct supervisor probably only makes 5 to 50% more, depending again on the corporate structure or the size of the organization. So that's a statistic you can just go with and go like, yeah, 5% more, 10% more. And remember, you want to ask a little above what you're aiming for, because they're gonna walk you down. And most of us are awful at this, for whatever reason, like business to business, but great in terms of patient care, right? And I always laugh about this every time I talk about job market stuff. I talk about McKinsey clinicians, right? Is they're the best at selling you what feels initially as a terrible plan, right? Does it hurt when you bend backwards? Yeah. Could you do that 10 more times for me? And it's like, we're great at this to our patients. just awful at each other. So we got to switch that mindset around. Value. There's a great business author by the name of Alexander Osterwalder. He's, I believe, Dutch or Danish. And he has something called the business model canvas. And part of that is an equation I use pretty much every single day called the unique value proposition equation. And that has to do with the job that you have to do, the job to be done, the gains that you make with that job, and the pains that you alleviate with that job. And you personally can fulfill that role to every single candidacy that you apply for. So the job is, PT assistant. But then the gains that you have to make for it, maybe you're willing to work hours that nobody else is willing to make. Or maybe you're a really positive individual that isn't going to bring down everything in a hum manner. And that's a pain that's going to be alleviated because you can actually add something positive to the culture of that workplace. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do there. And based on that, you can negotiate, just like Scotty was talking about. There's 6 primary dimensions of compensation. That's your salary, your benefits, the fringe benefits or the perks. Then you have the non-tangibles, which is your opportunity, your work-life balance, and the work-life culture, right? And we talk about the culture so much, but don't forget there is that work-life balance element that you can kind of negotiate out sometimes with, hey, how much is it really going to follow me home? Because I'm not cool if it does. So, what do we need to do there? Because sometimes it's, you can wiggle some of these things around. And same with the benefits. Benefits will cost an employer anywhere between 12 to 35% on top of the annual salary, depending on the employer. Safely is like 20 to 30. So some of that, if you decline those benefits, can lead to a little bit more cash flow to you. They may not be able to match it exactly per se because it might be accounted for differently in that organization, but that's something to think about. Same with perks, right? If they offer you a lot of equipment because you're doing home health, and they're really reimbursing well in terms of mileage, then awesome, right? But if not, then you can maybe ask for a little bit more pay on the top. Same with the workplace opportunity, right? If this is considered to be a glass ceiling or dead end situation, you might want to map that out for yourself with that whole right job, right time, right reason mindset of, okay, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here somewhere between 12 and 24 months. And I'm in maybe the 14 to 15 month mark. I'm going to start looking for my next lateral transfer as my way to move up in my own career path. These kind of sets will really, these kind of concept sets will really set you up for success in terms of just understanding there's so much more opportunity there for you. And I feel like we're dumped across this new grad threshold, like, good luck. And like, it isn't let upon us, which is why I'm glad we're doing this, and it's the whole thing. Like, membership matters. It's like what used to be the gym membership, because we can't do that anymore, really, at least not in the same way, right? A gym membership is only as good as how much you use it and what you use it for. So if you buy something as a membership and you do nothing with it, you're going to get nothing from it. And I think that today is a great example of what you can gain from it, not just from receiving, but giving, because there's a lot of value there too.
Yeah. And I'll just add that we focus a lot on like that new grad threshold and moving forward from the new grad perspective. But this is across your career. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to let these areas, like if you're 5 years out, if you find yourself furloughed or laid off right now, 10 years out, it doesn't matter. It's your time to go back to these basics and reinvest in yourself and to know the value of what you do as a profession. We have such a way that we can impact and change not only healthcare, but the society to which we serve. And there's so many opportunities for us to do that.
Yeah, 12 years out is apparently one of the highest burnout sections that we've discovered. It's new grads, sub 15 months, and 12 years out, because now you're expensive, right? And I've had so many 10 to 15 year clinicians come out when I'm speaking on job market stuff, and they're like, I can't get a job. So it's not just you new grads, right? It's also these seasoned clinicians that are supposedly at the peak of their career. It's a we problem, not a me problem. And I think the more we can see that as a lens, the better it's all going to be.
I agree. All right. With that, we don't have any questions waiting in the queue for us. So with that, I'll end it here. Everyone, thank you so much for your time today. Does anyone want to drop any of their social media information so that others can have it?
Sure.
All right. Go for it, Cam.
You can find me on Twitter. It's @cmasumi. So it's my first initial, my last name. Or you can shoot me an email if you have any questions at info@virtualphysio.net.
All right. Anyone else?
Scotty?
Yeah, so I'm also on Twitter. It's S, my first initial, and my last name, Gamboa PTA. So at S Gamboa PTA.
For me, you can find me pretty much anywhere. You can always go to updoc.com or updocmedia.com. If you want to connect with me personally, everything is Dr. Ben Fung. So Twitter, Instagram. I still have a Snapchat account for whatever reason. It's all DRBENFUNG. No TikTok, just because I refuse. I'm too old. You can also text me 470 Ben Fung. I will reply to that. You can email me ben@updoc.com. And am I missing anything? You can contact me. You'd be surprised. Like I get that all the time. Somebody will like text me, or they'll hit me on Twitter, or they'll email me, and like within like minutes, I'll get back and like, oh my gosh, you got back to me. And I'm like, I'm a person too. But yeah, I mean, very, very, very welcome. Questions, comments, concerns, requests, always open.
And you can always get a hold of the PTA caucus either through this page on APTA or on Facebook, or any of the other social media accounts that we have. And I personally can be reached at Sean_Bagby on Twitter. It's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Thank you guys for everything today, and talk to you soon.
Thanks
for having me.
Thanks.
Bye.